Thank you all for coming to the conference. Your shuttles are waiting for you outside. If you have not yet gone to the river, please, you can go now. You will find me still talking. Sometimes, if you are in part of these last panels, it's you have to have patience with yourself. Yeah, so don't shoot the messenger. I had my things lined up, but I can't find them. Yeah, and Tendai knows the truth about this, me having a presentation business. Friends, I did not come to make a presentation really, because on the last day after you've listened to everything that's being said, it's not a very interesting thing to have someone come and pontificate. To the leadership of the organizing collective, Evans, Stigmata, Becky, Ebrima, Briggs, and everybody else that I left out, the leadership of the institutions hosting us, Professor Khadebe, my brother Ebrima, Sinana, and others, and to all of you who have, like me, stayed the full course waiting to see the new frontiers and you are still looking for them, welcome. What do I intend to do? I think that when we come to a conference such as this, we all talk as we do about certain subjects, and we almost feel we have a common understanding about the subjects. And if one comes into the space, it becomes interesting, because if we are to define our consciousness in this moment, we have to define our consciousness in the context of several things. Financialization, philanthropization, militarization, and if one wants to, prophetization and profitization of development and wealth creation. And if you do not attach yourself to the historiography of philanthropy and how it emerges first as crude charity, then it goes into social engineering during the Victorian age, and they start throwing around cliches that philanthropy is not about giving a man a fish, but teaching a man how to fish, even if you have caused the rivers to silt up. And so whether you teach him to fish or you give him a fish, there are no rivers to fish from. So we have to locate philanthropy and financialization or philanthropization within the broader geopolitical and geoeconomic context. And that was done in part and unpacked the competing interpretations of the good or the ills of philanthropization. I work for a global philanthropy, and I can safely say, without any fear of contradiction, not knowing whether I'll still have my job afterwards, that the two inseparable things, or three inseparable things, are colonialism, imperialism, and philanthropy. Because this country, Zimbabwe, was colonized by a philanthropist called Cecil John Rhodes, who still gives money to Africans who are proud to be Rhodes Scholars. So the history of philanthropy in this country is a history of extraction. It's a history of undermining the collective will and sovereignty of my people. My own boss made money in ways that some of you have studied. So I came here and I listened to you talk about the virtues of philanthropy, African philanthropy, And the leading African philanthropists are the Nigerian thieves who benefited from military rule and demutualization of the state, privatization of the state. The Zimbabwean state elite who benefited from some funny contracting processes. The elite in Egypt and the elite elsewhere. Wherever you turn, you cannot separate philanthropy from kleptocracy. Maybe because we are Christians, we can easily say, go and sin no more. So, my friends, I hear you, and I was listening to Tade and arguing with him because he said, well, there's no real link between philanthropy and development. And I think someone was giving a critique of philanthropy from the lens of development. And philanthropy is posited as this altruistic spirit, the need to do good. I'm suggesting as we close this meeting that doing African economic structural transformation, regional integration and democratization must of necessity start from the premise of diversity of approaches to reality, depending on country, region, social, cultural, religious, gender, class, and other ways of plurality. It seems to me that this moment we're in requires a rethink of the plurality of human experience and human conceptions of freedom. And that indeed African experience with development, democracy, governance, politics, economy, and philanthropy are the context that define our multi-truths and also define our multiple narratives. As such, different approaches to economic thinking as containing specific and general imaginations and proposals about society shaped by different cultures, experiences, realities, faith positions are what has dominated our conference. So that our theory of change has vacillated from the embrace of neoliberalism, kleptocracy, imperialism, and colonialism and neocolonialism. And all we really want is for these capitalists to show a little bit of empathy and give us money to keep beehives, to make crafts and arts, and for the African women to be able to just put a meal of food on their table. And these philanthropists can continue to invest in extractive companies that are taking away water, taking away natural resources, taking away sovereignty. You know, it's such a beautiful thing to be a native because, you know, you accept your place like that person we are told from those that read the Christian Bible that came to the table and said to Jesus, give me bread. And he said, do dogs get bread from the master? And he was told, by the guy then answers him and says, look, I may be a dog, but even dogs get crumbs from the master's table. Look, my friends, I'm not in the business of crumbs. No matter how beautiful or tasty they are, I'm not here for the leftovers of capitalism that is raping my country, raping our future, undermining our sovereignty. No, if that's what you are here for, stay alone. I say, oh, Brian, be practical. Okay. You should have told Mandela that, be practical. Just be a good native. Stop fighting for the liberation of South Africa. You know, then you won't go to Robben Island. Freedom is not a convenience, my brothers and sisters. So this rethinking, somebody said shifting power. I've been listening to them talking about shifting power. You know, and I'm saying power. It's not a gear that you shift. You are shifting it how? You know, how do you shift power between yourself and Bill Gates? Between yourself and George Soros? Between yourself and, look, my friends, you either make alternative power, disrupt existing power, right? Or ignore existing power. Please, stop using placebos. Placebos, for those of you who don't speak Shona, when a child comes to you and they think they are sick, they say, no, I'm not well. Then you give them something, it's not even a tablet. Yeah, and then they come and say, are you okay, baby? Yes, I'm well. And I have a bunch of African intellectuals and activists who now want to engage in the business of giving society placebos. The progressive underdevelopment of our society is because of three terrains. Number one, the terrain that accepts that black, brown, people of color, and Africans really have no notion of civilization, and therefore they need to be civilized. They have no notion of commerce, and therefore they need to be put into microfinance, micro-enterprise, micro-philanthropy. You know, and I've told you this before, my friends, that the micromanagement and micronization of the native is also part of native intellectual genocide. They accept we can never be macro at any stage. It is impossible for us to own our own economies, the real economies, to manage our own economies, to be the real deciders of our destinies. So we are happy to have crumbs from the master's table. If this is what we're doing, then you guys are really good native commissioners, and you represent what Mamdani said, decentralized despotism. Just get another native to tell the other native, everything is gonna be all right. Yeah. And then get them to engage in this NGO jargon. No, I have 30 minutes, it's not yet 10 minutes. You were busy making announcements about what you visited yesterday. I traveled to say this, right? I have a timer here. You know, so it's very simple. When I start talking about these things, I've got a timer. They say 10 minutes. I say, but you told me it's 30 minutes at the beginning, right? Look, my friends, it's very simple. Then we are teaching the guys we need to prioritize impact. Okay, I really want to measure impact, but the impact of neo-imperialism, imperialism, neo-colonialism, and neoliberalism in my life. I really want to measure impact, but I want to understand how philanthropy, your altruism, will help me deal with the structural and historical questions, the reparative financing question, and not just the palliative financing questions. I want to prioritize impact, but I really want to know whether, you know, I worked for a group, and I'm sorry, my friends from ActionAid, I worked for ActionAid International. And after some time, I discovered that we had been, as ActionAid in Kenya for more than 40 years. And the same people who founded ActionAid had founded Oxfam, and we had been doing some powerful work to deal with powerful issues. And then I then asked, guys, where are the people that we took out of poverty? Because it looks like we took them, but the poverty is still in the community where we started. We built schools and even branded. We had strategies to fight poverty together, and the right to end poverty, power to end poverty. And then I joined the United Nations Development Program. And we were there empowering communities, building their capacity. The people who needed capacity built were the capitalists who kept on doing the same old things, even worse, to undermine the global ecology, leading to the ecological crisis. And we were not paying attention to the people. Steve Biko got so upset with his white liberal friends because they were always coming to the black consciousness movement, trying to help the black people have capacity. And he says, my friends, this is not racist. It's practicalist. Why don't you go and you, since you are white, and deal with your fellows? So this thing that Becky Moyo calls helping to give, giving to help, based on conceptions of the self, the other, social moral obligation, common good. This thing that Tade Aina says is determined by political and social context, influencing what and how and where, when an individual, private or company gives, also is based on a hierarchization of humanity. This hierarchy of humanity with the black, the brown, and in the black and the brown, the woman and the child and the young people are constantly and permanently at the bottom of the pyramid. So that the legal frameworks are about how to maintain the hierarchy and how to occasionally sanitize it so that you create safety valves so that there is no revolution against it. So in the theory of change, the seven organizing principles that I had this week that you need to deal with are this idea of altruism of foreign, local, regional, rich sugar daddies and sugar mummies. That their private preference and personal fixations should be appreciated no matter how disconnected they are from our own developmental aspirations as a collective, as a people. Now, the power asymmetry in getting a billionaire to ask only one poor community what they want when they don't have information about what's possible, right? Sounds so good. It sounds so empowering. I come from the left. The people must decide. The local must decide. And localism in the context of power and information asymmetries becomes the worst form of enslavement. Right? Number two, so we use power as a site, social power, political power, economic power, military power, determines the contours of philanthropy. But these also determine the contours of injustice. And philanthropy does not work except in two of those dimensions. And it is almost deliberate. When it works in technology, only 5% of philanthropy is talking about ownership of technology and therefore leveraging the ability to become a global player from the local. Most of philanthropy is trying to help us to use technology more effectively to manage and report on our misery. And the more we use that technology, the more the billionaires that are sitting in Silicon Valley and elsewhere that own the intellectual property rights to the technology become wealthier. And when philanthropy focuses on poverty and political repression, it comes with an orthodox understanding of what is the best form of government. It is not willing to accept any other. In fact, many of the major global philanthropies emerged and started coming into the context of this African territory as a way of defending hegemonic Western interests, American interests, a particular form of governance, and to counter communism. So it did not come to diversify, to guarantee diversity. It came to ensure that one version and vision of the world was established. If you doubt, remember what the sister told you about how much money will go into the Gaza question and how much money will go into Sudan, how much money will go into Ukraine. So this neutral space that's non-racial, that's non-classist, that's financing women's rights and etc. For some reason, it remembers its racial preoccupation in the hierarchy of humanity and who's worth more dollars. So, my friends, if you don't look at the racialized nature of global philanthropy, you will not understand why, when philanthropy is controlled and transacted by the same principle, even if it is being done by people who look like Brian, who are black, some of them as silver black as I am, that racialized outcomes are not dependent on the color of the person that's implementing the project or the system. And so you can be analyzing each other based on the color of your skin, but racialized outcomes are about a system that produces the same. You can produce apartheid without a single white person in the state, because applying certain principles, certain approaches, certain tools gives you the outcomes of separate development. And that is why this localism breaks. This localism is a dangerous ideology, because when Jan Smuts wanted to explain to his Oxford court why apartheid was an important thing, he said the native must be allowed to develop separately in his locality. And the white people, because they have a unique culture, must be allowed to develop separately. And then all your big professors come and say the world is a global village. If it is a global village, let's share. So this question where we say we want agency of the oppressed, give me the means of agency. And the means of agency is not just money and voice. The means of agency is the instrument. Capital is not only cash. The professor here will tell you from a business school. And the idea that has gone into our artists, into our politicians, that capital is only cash, that if you have cash money, you have capital, has meant that when we're talking about shifting power, we're only talking about cash changing hands. And we even said, and it's important to do it, give us long-term funding. Even if I gave you money for 10 years, it will not shift power. It's important to give money long-term for core support. It will only create a local civilocracy, an elite in civil society who, like those of us who work for the empire, begin to drive the same cars, drink the same drinks, patronize the same hotel, play the same golf. And when there is an alliance of elites, the elite of labor in philanthropy, the elite of leisure does not arrive. So Africans don't become owners. Those who become a civilocracy in philanthropy, whether they are black women and men and brown women and men who are working in global philanthropy, or they are people working at the local level, they now have a class interest to keep the status quo, because the status quo is about their political economy. I am sorry, I have to tell you that. So it seems to me the coloniality of power in global philanthropy needs to be analyzed together with the imperialism of philanthropism and philanthropization. To transform this, you need to understand that capital and philanthropy are Siamese twins. Even George Soros in 1997 wrote an article, you can Google it, where he said, look, the greatest threat to democracy and the human future is laissez-faire capitalism. And he writes in that article, I made my money from the system, but the system is the singular threat to democracy and human security. So when we say the failure of neoliberalism, neoliberalism was from the very onset a racialized ideology which justified historically privileged races from extracting from historically underprivileged and oppressed, and also conscripting the elite from the regions and spaces and places to believe that the system offers a dream to all, that accumulation and concentration of wealth, and then giving a little bit of pieces. The poor shall always be with you. So don't try and deal with wealth creation. The poor will always be poor. To those who have, more shall be given. To those who don't have, even the little they have shall be taken away. And so philanthropy was doing this. I want us to be mindful that even as I criticize philanthropy, I want to end my talk by suggesting to you three essential features of philanthropic resources that we see in our context. Number one, distribution, redistribution, and deployment and investment and production of philanthropic resources remains entirely along the lines of the old colonial matrix of power. The center-periphery still applies, even for African billionaires who are called African philanthropists. They are still very much aligned to the center periphery. So philanthropy has become an enclave within the economy. What am I saying to you? That it's the distribution, redistribution, deployment, investment, and production of philanthropic resources remains entirely unrelated to questions of wealth creation amongst the communities that we seek to give to. So the communities are not becoming wealthy. Their poverty is not really becoming less. It's becoming only bearable. Number two, philanthropy is taking place independent of political processes. Whether or not philanthropy has the consent of citizens, whether or not it relates to state developmental aspirations, whether or not there are legitimate or illegitimate regimes, whether or not it leads to gender transformative policies and institutions, Doesn't matter. Philanthropy continues to be philanthropy because it is the altruism of an individual. And African philanthropy is different. Number 3, many philanthropic resources are finite, project-focused, theme-tied, non-renewable, just like oil, gas, and here at this point, most philanthropic resources are finite, project-focused, theme-tied, and non-renewable, just like oil and gas. So I've come to ask, how do we find a green transition to philanthropic resources? A sustainable, what are those critical minerals for new philanthropic imaginaries of resourcing? Right? Philanthropy at a socio-economic and political level is detached from other economic and political processes. Its short-termism or non-renewableness gives rise to an array of political economy dynamics with adverse consequences for countries and communities. In the old days in Congo, when the Nyiragongo volcano erupted, and then there was a conflict, philanthropists rushed in to give the women of Congo, because of the incidents of rape, ARVs. It was a 9-month project. When the project ended, the caring philanthropists went away. Those of you who know, giving ARVs to people who have no food and then discontinuing after you had started was disaster. They were giving to help and killed helping. But philanthropy also suffers, colleagues, let's be frank, from the rent-seeking behavior of political elites and civil society elites, the civilocracy. Their interests seem to coincide with the political leverage that philanthropic organizations are seeking. So all the big philanthropic organizations want leverage in your country for bigger things. You are the local fixer, you get philanthropic resources, a win-win situation happens at the expense of sovereignty and the future. And the information asymmetries are not being addressed. The disproportionate capacities, the questions that we focus on, such as, so we try to intervene. Grant-making principles and code of ethics. Jerry will tell you, the European principles on grant-making, African principles on grant-making. This evolving charter of humane exploration, and responsible altruism somehow needs to be brought into alignment with the question of transformative agenda. Then, of course, the diversification of instruments. In fact, we actually sounds like we are public relations officers for all the neoliberal forms of financialized globalization. So, diversification of instruments of accumulation, growth and distribution, whether it's commercialization and commerciality in philanthropy, corporatization of philanthropy, techno-fixing of philanthropy, that we now can use technology and the dangers that are attended of tech feudalism and etc. So in essence, there is nothing wrong per se, but if we don't link it to the risk of people who don't own, the third is color fixing. You know, after the George Floyd moment, all the big philanthropists started trying to find brown, black, blue, yellow faces to put on their boards. So you could win this DAI contest. Look, if you go to our website and you see Deidre Williams and Brian Kagoro and oh my God, we are DEI compliant. But does that mean that the natives that populate the public-facing components of these philanthropies have any power? There are things we can do there, but the expectation is that as a black or brown person, you arrive at this position of privilege with appreciation. You leave your soul outside the door. You leave your ideology outside the door. You leave your radicalism outside the door. You sit at the table of the masters and say, so blessed am I, and uplifted. And you even write in this moment, 50 years after liberation in Africa, the first black, the first Asian, the first this. My goodness, my goodness. So this color fixing game has hidden across the globe the deep racist prejudices that inhere in most philanthropy. Let's name it. There has not been the courage to face the challenges of class inequity, the division between global north, global south, the division between men and women, the division between where do we send large grants to? And if we want to give Africa a lot of money, or Asia, we have to find a white person we can trust in South Africa, a white person we can trust in Zimbabwe. I'm sorry, I know those of you who are white, this is not really about you, it's about the system. Right? This color fixing, Dr. Moyo, African philanthropy that wishes to leverage its power globally must fight three struggles. The local struggle for dignity and agency and knowledge, to end knowledge imperialism. The regional struggle to fight fragmentation and create an ecosystem of mutual support amongst philanthropy. But the global struggle, because you won't have time to do the African philanthropy, you will not be left alone. Because where do you think the rest of us will go? We'll also be trying to gain relevance in your context, right? And so that's, if you noticed all the big philanthropies, the minute Dr. Moyo and Vit started talking about Africa philanthropy in an organized way, they now don't give small or $1 billion, $5 billion, $10 billion. And the rest of us spend our time chasing the billions, and that retains the influence of the status quo. Our ability to imagine alternative means and forms and ways of generating wealth and resources that give us longevity is undermined by the short-term availability of toxic goodness. So, we have also, I'm now ending. We have also thrown money at the problem with a longer leash. So when we throw money at the problem with a longer leash, what we essentially say is very simple. And I work in global philanthropy, and I hope everyone that works with me will watch this, because I say this in salary and I say this in public, right? Dedre says this internally and we say this in public, because we're not about to be faces that sanitize continuation of hierarchization of humanity, that some deserve more, some deserve less. Why? Because they don't have capacity. So this constantly, women don't have capacity to manage big amounts of money. Black people don't have capacity to manage, but we don't use women and black. We just say, you know, the institution is in formative stages. It's also because, you know, in order for us to comply with C3, C4, C5, or C10, right, we got to make sure that, you know, there's accountability, that the governance is proper, and also, we had issues about their ability to report consistently. It's an institution of 7 people. They are working in a community of 10 million people. You want them to be writing a report every week to you to tell you, Massa, I've used your money as you pleased. So, colleagues, this localization and penny counting has essentially meant that what we do is we end up with poor people and excluded people marked out from normalcy. We end up with instances where foreign agency laws are not reacting only to the money, but they are reacting to certain things that are happening. This criminalization of dissent. We end up dehumanizing the poor. We end up stigmatizing the ability of local knowledge to be transformative. We end up objectifying Africanness, womanhood, or any other status. And we end up disorganizing the broad mass, because money is not always an agent of good. When it is irresponsibly poured, it often creates new hierarchies and contestation within a local. Mischaracterization of the poor as voiceless and brainless. So because we were closing the conference, I'd come to say to you, the next frontier of philanthropy is how to ensure that African philanthropy occupies and adopts the struggle to change what global philanthropy looks like, what global philanthropy does, how global philanthropy does what it does. For those of us who, like you, are in global philanthropy, it is for us to stop being self-righteous and thinking that our job is to act as native commissioners to ensure that you are complying with the imperial dictates of goodness, of capacity and start. There is a third dimension. The de-link between African knowledge production spaces and African do-goodism will essentially mean that the knowledge you rely on is the knowledge that we author at the center. So we start saying there is now a global polycrisis. I don't know a moment when Africa was never in polycrisis. Africa was always in polycrisis. So we start using cliches. It is the big billionaires, philanthropists that need greater coordination, because I do not recall a moment where SACCOs were not coordinating. I don't recall a moment where at the local level, for whatever reason, we were not coordinating. What the apartheid state committed and created, Dr. Moyo, was a separate existence, separate development process, where the only ability of Africans to come together is through the permission of the white government. The only way Africans could do things together is through supervision, because there were laws, Jerry. When 4 or 5 black people gathered in this country, in South Africa, in Mozambique and elsewhere, it was called an unlawful gathering. But when the same 4 or 5 or even 10 or 100 black people were either at a beer hall where they had been asked to be, or a casino, or they were called by the district administrator for no reason, or they were going to watch the white men play Pangton, they were not called an unlawful gathering. The unlawfulness of native gathering was based on the intention and altruism of the one who held power. So local philanthropic development must be linked to Pan-African philanthropic development. It must be linked to global Africa aspirations. African philanthropies and Caribbean philanthropies and black Brazilian philanthropies and European philanthropies must align to produce a narrative of philanthropy which is not only begging the status quo to do things better, but a narrative of philanthropy that begins to reimagine the instruments, the institutions, the processes. But it must contest the binary of profit and non-profit. Any of you who had mothers will know that your mother was both a for-profit and non-profit institution. Because for one, she was your mother, but two, she had to sell vegetables, do something to educate you. And the fact that our government still have this very strict for-profit, non-profit bit that's defined, and you don't get a tax incentive as a woman who does philanthropy. But if I come as an external philanthropy, I get a tax incentive. The tax codes need to be reimagined. The binaries need to be reimagined. But above all, colleagues, we need to create regional, national, not just funds, but repository of knowledge, repository of technical support, repository of back-end, front-end support. The re-granting institutions on this continent need to be a lot more than they are. And we need to create Pan-African philanthropy, meaning the following, Dr. Moyo. We need to be African philanthropies giving to other Africans outside their borders. Right now, the limitations on remittances of money in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, and elsewhere are such that even if you wanted to be a Pan-African philanthropist, it's very expensive to give money to your brethren and your sister. I have talked a lot. I hope as you close your conference, I've been able to say it was a wonderful conference. There are many new frontiers, but the struggle that is facing us is much more than natives being accepted as equal human beings. It is building the future based on our image. And building the future based on our image means contesting, means protesting, means proposing but it also means walking away, as I am about to do.